I'm David Hartnett, Chief Economic Development Officer for the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and we're one of the founding organizations for Venture Atlanta. We support because the results are there in capital investment and in job growth. We landed in 2008 with an idea, and now we've had over 500 presenting companies that have raised $4.5 billion with recorded exits of close to $15 billion. And we're proud to say we're the most successful forum of its kind on the East Coast. Now let's move on to the panel. So we have a great lineup to discuss building a unique and powerful innovation ecosystem. And our panelists are Barry Givens, Managing Director, Techstars, and Managing Partner of CoLab Capital. We have Duria Faruqi, Board of Director for both Intercontinental Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. We have Jay Bailey, President and CEO for the Russell Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And then we have Alex Gonzalez, Chief Innovation Officer at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, will be our moderator. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Alex.
Well, hello, and welcome here to our panel here at Venture Atlanta. And good morning and good afternoon and good night. Well, this is so exciting to have this global audience as we talk about building powerful and unique innovation ecosystems. And this group here, I just love because first of all, they're friends first. And also, if I think about it here, you know, Duria, you and I have a heavy corporate background in terms of, you know, kind of how we grew up here. And Barry and Jay, you have this strong entrepreneurial background, yet we're here colliding to kind of for common purpose, which I think is pretty neat. But let's kind of step back here, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about inclusive innovation. We're going to talk about how we interact, how we collide. We're going to talk about corporate innovation. But let me start out, Barry, with you, because you were actually on stage some years ago, you know, couple years ago, and here at Venture Atlanta, and pitching. So you are an entrepreneur. You've raised money, and now you're an investor with CoLab Capital, and you're also an ecosystem builder with Techstars. So talk about the importance of community and ecosystem for an entrepreneur beyond just capital.
I think building an innovation community, like it's deeply rooted in that word community, right? Like what does it mean to have an ecosystem, to have a community? And that doesn't include the money, right? Like the money is something we dearly need in Atlanta. So I don't want to like move past that fact, but the people, what does the bench look like? What do the service providers look like? Where are there attorneys that are affordable when you're a startup trying to get off the ground and you need to get your paperwork done and get that, you know, you need that first push early on. So there are all these different portions of the community that we need to play a role. Like where are the developers at? Like how do we find, if I'm a startup founder, where do I go? Who has like this stable of developers that can come at all different stages, right? From CTO level to early stage junior engineer, like all the way up. And I think that's the part that we're building now. And what you're starting to see is that the community is not just like inside the perimeter. Like we have all these other nuggets around the city, and that bringing all of these different communities together, the resources are coming together, and we're becoming the powerhouse that I think we deserve to be.
So Jay, I want to go over to you, and you have been building and running a Russell Center for Innovation Entrepreneurship. Of course, you have a kind of roots in entrepreneurism as well too. But we're going to definitely get into kind of inclusive innovation and kind of that core mission for Russell Center. But talk about building an innovation capability in Atlanta, both in terms of what you are solving for when you do that, but also talk about a little bit of what exists around Metro Atlanta that you kind of leverage when you're building Russell Center.
Well, I mean, I've traveled all over. I spent significant time in Silicon Valley. All my friends at Google and PayPal and LinkedIn. I've been to Cambridge, hung out with the folks at MIT and Harvard. Love what they're doing in Durham and Raleigh with Duke and UNC. Love what they're doing in Nashville. Love what they're doing in Austin. None of them have gotten diversity right. None of them have gotten inclusion right. And when we look at the tools that Atlanta has, I mean, who else has Morehouse, Clark, Spelman, Morris Brown, ITC, Morehouse School of Medicine, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. Even at the Russell Center, we're building at 54,000 square feet, literally the largest center in America dedicated to growing, developing, and scaling black businesses. Atlanta has all the tools. And I dare to say that Atlanta is a hell of a lot cooler than all the other cities that I mentioned.
Right.
We've got the historical context, we've got the entertainment, we've got the celebrities, we've got the energy, we've got the grit. So shame on all of us if we don't come together to collaborate something that the world's never seen and history will never forget. We have all the tools. And we have an opportunity in Atlanta. There are more African-American enrolled college students in Atlanta, Georgia than any other place on the planet. We have the pipeline, we have the corporations. There are more corporate innovation centers here in Atlanta than anywhere else. We have the pieces, let's build the recipe and let's bake this cake. Yeah. I think that Atlanta becomes the model to the rest of the world because we lose GDP every year because the ideas and the brilliance that sits on the other side of the tracks never reaches the marketplace. It's time to make innovation work for all people, and I think Atlanta's the model to make that happen.
And Joe, and Duri, I want to talk a little bit about our corporate collaboration here in a minute, but before, one thing I don't want to lose, Jay, is as you build Russell Center, you're also being really deliberate about making sure there's connectivity with other innovation centers, the ATDCs and of the world, and talk about why that was important, because it's really easy to isolate, but you feel like there's important in Atlanta to connect as well.
I tap into the spirit of Mr. Russell. One of his famous sayings was, collaboration will always beat competition. And why would I need to be a fintech expert and have a vertical in fintech when I've got 10 in the city? I think we're stronger together. The African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And if we're not collaborative, I think the only way forward for our city is for me to always talk to Barry, for me to always connect with Duria, for me to always stay at your hip with the chamber. And collectively, we can make this thing work. It just does not work in a silo.
Right, and that spirit of collaboration is what I want to transition here. And first of all, one thing I do want to mention to our audience, that if you do want to ask a question, please put it in your chat or whatever, and we'll try to get to it during our conversation here. But Duria, Jay talks about something that I think sometimes we don't even give ourselves enough credit in terms of about collaboration in Atlanta. And before we talk about corporate innovation, you also have been very involved with our corporations at many levels, from having them work together to helping them in innovation. Talk about the spirit that's pretty unique in Atlanta about collaboration with our biggest companies, even beyond innovation, when it comes to things like sports and all that.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, you said up beautifully what makes Atlanta unique in terms of the ecosystem. And I think from a corporate perspective, one of the things that is really underappreciated about our city and about Atlanta is the fact that we may not have 10 companies in one industry, but we have a giant from 10 different industries right here in Atlanta, right? When you think about Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Delta Airlines, UPS, and many of these companies were built right here, right? The flip side of that is also that a lot of these companies don't compete with each other, right? So when you've got a top 3 company, which is a giant in its own right and an industry leader, and they come together, whether it's at the Metro Chamber or through the Atlanta Committee for Progress, which is a quarterly meeting of 30 Atlanta-based CEOs, 7 college and university presidents, and the mayor to really think about what is the right investment in this city. That's powerful, right? And what's happened in recent years, and frankly, if you also think about the founders, I mean, Arthur Blank, right? He was one of the founders of Home Depot and now owns the Atlanta Falcons and Atlanta United, great center of cultural activity in our city. A lot of philanthropic investment has gone into Atlanta from these corporate leaders. But when they come together with the Atlanta Committee for Progress and think about what's going to move the needle, and they think about inequality and the challenges that we have, and yet we also have these assets, one of the things that has come full circle is a recognition that investing in entrepreneurs and startups is both a business imperative and a civic imperative. Why a business imperative? Because these industries are getting disrupted from talented entrepreneurs and startups that are racing to IPOs, right? And speaking of IPOs, you've also got ICE in Atlanta, right? Which powers the New York Stock Exchange right here from our city. Also a reason why I serve on that board.
Right.
But if you think about the both business and civic imperative, historically, corporations have invested philanthropically, and you go back to the time when Dr. King won the Nobel Prize. The CEO of Coca-Cola called other fellow CEOs and said, "You are all going to show up at this dinner."
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't show up at this dinner, forget about doing business with Coca-Cola and us continuing to stay and being a civic agent in the city.
Right.
So, one, there is a historical legacy that corporate leadership has in being on the right side of progress. And then two, there's a recognition that investing in entrepreneurs and connecting the corporate horsepower that we have with the startup ecosystem is an opportunity to actually invest in community, because you build wealth, you close gaps in racial and generational inequality. And Engage was born out of that, right? Engage is a venture fund and an accelerator in Atlanta, which came out of the Atlanta Committee for Progress. 11 companies based in Atlanta backing a fund which is unlike any other, right? And think about Techstars, except multiplied by 11 companies backing it. And that's been hugely successful, right? So there's clearly been both a legacy as well as a evolution of what that means and how investing in startups and underrepresented founders is a game changer.
Yeah, and you bring up Engage Ventures, as you're talking about this collisions, like I like to call them, or this kind of between corporations and startups, and Engage is a great example. They just had their showcase yesterday, in fact. But better getting specific on some of those collisions too. One of our companies here, Cox Enterprises, they do a lot in the innovation space. From one program they sponsor a Startup Runway, which is to showcase underrepresented founders. But they also have not one, but two Techstars here in Atlanta. And so talk a little bit about your Techstars program that you're running, and why does Cox care about it?
Cox is special, right? Like it's very hard to find a partner that cares, that doesn't want to boast about what they care about, right? Like they do this all like under the radar. Up until recently, most people didn't know most of the things that Cox. I think they're making an initiative now to celebrate their wins and to hopefully get some other corporates to try to compete with them to see who can out-help the other corporations. But their emphasis on innovation and collaboration with corporations in this city is something I think they're going to lead this charge. And I think leading it in a way that makes inclusivity and diversity a key as well. So I have a Techstars class. As you know, I run the social impact program, and we also have the Atlanta program, as you mentioned. But I had this idea. I was sitting at home, and I feel like I wasn't doing enough from post George Floyd, as we call it, the awakening, as my friend Joey coined it. And I wanted to do more, and I went to Cox, and I said, I want my next program to be focused on companies that are tackling social justice and systemic racism issues. And the final email, we went through all the channels, the final email from Alex at Cox was, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it big. Right? Like that type of support for efforts that are, this is pretty off base from, this is a pretty dynamic decision. And to know and to have that comfort that I can go to Techstars and I can go to Cox and say, this is what I feel as a black man going through what I'm going through right now, and this is what I want to do about it. And to have them jump behind me and support, like, this is what corporations should be watching. This is how you follow. This is how, as Jay mentioned, this is how we win in Atlanta.
Right. And I want to start now really clicking into inclusion, but since we're real time here, I want to ask you, there's a question for you live about if you were to pick one company from your first Techstars cohort, which that in itself is probably heartbreaking, who would you pick to feature and why?
Who asked this question live?
We'll ask Matthew, whoever. I know which kid do you love the most?
Exactly. Oh man. I gotta go with our own Atlanta darling, and I bring her up because she's been through the entire Atlanta. She is a success story, and I'll say along with like Jasmine at Gooder, but Civic Dinners.
Yes.
And Jen,
yes.
right? Like she started with Goody Nation at their at their pre-accelerator program. You fast forward, and she's done all this stuff in the city, And then she goes through my Techstars program. Now Cox is a customer. I think she announced today, I think the press release came out today, that she has a big initiative with Coke. And so you think about all the things that we're talking about on this stage right now.
Yeah.
Like Atlanta Seed Company, Jamie Hamilton led her round, right? So when you think about everything that we're talking about on the stage and Atlanta coming together, from the pre-accelerator programs that are focused on diversity and solving problems that matter. I think we're going to get into this a little later about also having the fabric of social impact in our fabric and making sure we get innovation right through Atlanta, to getting investors in Atlanta, to having the corporates not back her in a social impact way, but to back her by putting dollars as customers in her product.
Right.
Right? Like, that's the biggest impact, because now when she leaves Atlanta, she goes to sell, P&G and all these other corporations around the country. She's going to say, oh, I have 4 or 5 of the largest corporations in the world that are in Atlanta that have already used my product. You should too.
Right.
That's powerful. And so thank you, Matthew, for asking me that question. I was mad at you at first, but it ended up being a really
Worked
good
out
question.
good. Well, let's shift over into inclusive innovation or inclusive entrepreneurism, or really, I think a belief we all have here on stage, along with many out in the community, that part of what's going to make Atlanta a powerful and unique innovation community and ecosystem is being the most inclusive. But this is about business too, and so Jay, starting with you, I'd love to get your perspective on as well too. What's the what are investors really leaving on the table? What are they missing by not having a much more inclusive innovation investment strategy?
I mean, I sometimes even wince at the question
Yeah.
that if 87% of the marketplace is driven by white men, and we think that we're going to get the best products, the best ideation, the best anything,
Right.
that's just flawed logic. The largest economies in the United States has already been proven. New York and LA, and they're the 2 most diverse cities in our union. Again, I say it on the most grassroots of level. Find me someone more innovative on the planet than a single mother with 2 kids making 17 grand a year.
Right.
The brilliance, the grit, the resilience, the things that go through her mind, how she problem solves. What's never happened before is the belief that her ideas matter and a pathway to get those ideas to the marketplace. Again, I said it in the first half, we lose real GDP every year because there's no pathway for those great ideas that happen on the other side of the tracks to find their way into your homes. And when we look at Atlanta, if we start to think what our community would look like, when there's no Paul Judge, when there's no Ryan Wilson, when there's no Jewel Burke, when there's no Barry, when there's no Duria, what does that look like?
Right.
But then also, what does it look like if there were 10 Barrys and 10 Durias or 10 me's? I think that Atlanta, to your point, Barry, you made a beautiful example of what can happen to literally launch a company into the stratosphere, when I'm saying that at my back are 5 of the largest corporations in the world that believe in what I do. What other city has that? But then also, what other city is affordable enough to dream? Like, you can make a Jewel, you can make a Jasmine in Atlanta because we've got the infrastructure here to make it real, and you can afford it. This is the place, and I think that when you talk about systemic disadvantages that have occurred over years, we're the place that could do and provide these entrepreneurs with more than just symbols of hope. The 3 of us on the stage, the 4 of us on the stage are creating institutions to manufacture it. And I think that kind of system designed to combat systems will yield the kind of results with diverse founders that believe that their ideas matter. And at the heart of, we talk about a lot about capital and curriculum and support, but if we ignore self-esteem, self-confidence, and the belief that you belong in the marketplace, we'll miss the mark. I think Atlanta is one of those places that can undergird the kind of confidence necessary for diverse founders to say, you know what, I can do this.
Right.
And I think, Alex, for investors, there needs to be a recognition that the metrics are biased, right? So for example, if there's an assumption that you've gotten to a certain point in your entrepreneurship and startup journey because you have access to a friends and family round, how many underrepresented entrepreneurs have the same kind of access to a friends and family round, which is basically your family members and rich friends, right? To get to that next stage where you're going for a seed round or a Series A. So number one, I think there has to be a recognition by investors that the metrics are frankly biased in terms of how they think about traction and how they value and assess where someone should be in their entrepreneurship journey, right? So, I mean, I remember in the first cohort of Engage, the female founders that became a part of the first cohort were self-funded. That was not an accident, right? So it was born out of the fact that they had challenges raising money as early stage founders, right? And you know, it led to them being successful, being leaner, being more creative, putting in more perseverance and grit on the table, and still building successful companies. So guess what? The first investor that is lucky enough to invest in their companies is instantly getting a much better return on investment.
Right.
And that's the thinking that needs to change, right? That it's more that you are lucky to be the person that this founder and this startup is going to include in their tent, because they have made this journey so far on very different terms, on a very different playing field. It's not where you are, it's what it took for you to get here.
Sometimes there's a argument or statement that there are not enough Black founders or Latinx founders or women founders in the pipeline to invest in. So would love to get your thoughts, and Barry, particularly, because I think this is one of the reasons why you're starting up Collab Capital in particular. So talk a little bit about that, how the world should be thinking about that, and if there's any truth to that.
That only exists if you have a limited mindset to where your pipeline comes from and what it looks like, right? Like that comes from that investor's limited mindset, not the market's limitations. And so, as an example, as you mentioned with Collab, when COVID hit, we're in the middle of fundraising right now for our fund, and obviously fundraising, you know, a pandemic hits, so we stepped back a little bit. But then we held a pitch competition called Pivot and Pitch for companies that had to make a pivot during COVID. And we held applications open for 6 days and got 425 applications from Black founders.
Yeah.
For Techstars, my first class had around 300 applications, and a little bit over half were Black founders. And as I talked to them, their sentiments were, we didn't feel, to Jay's point, confident that we would get in until we saw your face as the managing director. That gave us the confidence to apply, because even if we didn't get in, we at least felt like we had a shot to get in, right? And so I think this whole limited pipeline thing, it's something that's baked up on false narratives and off of just the metrics that people are pushing to the founders. If you only get your founders from 3 schools, you know, Stanford, MIT, blah, 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 and all those schools have less than 6% Black people, you're not going to find a bunch of Black people that you're going to invest in, right? If you only invest out of Silicon Valley and Boston, both of which have less than 6% Black people, I think less than 7 maybe. I think Boston might be 6. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Like, you're not going to find that many Black people, right? And so it's these metrics that we set as investors of what we signal as success that creates the limitations, not the innovation and the brilliance of the individuals themselves. You have to open up your mind. If someone comes in, I'm from Atlanta, and I don't sound like probably what somebody that's coming out of Boston sounds like. But if you don't pay me any attention because I'm a little country, or excuse my grammar, this may be a little off, but if I'm hood or ghetto in your eyes, and you write me off because of that, you lose out on a brilliant entrepreneur. Like, the investors have to open their eyes that there is brilliance in these communities, and there's economic opportunity they're missing out on.
Right. And Jay, just to kind of put a bow on that as well too. If you think about what you're doing in terms of building Russell Center, and really, to me, it's also been a physical asset that kind of really represents this aspect of inclusive innovation, you know, for Atlanta. Yeah, you have every innovation center, the universities. You talk about how just the entire community is really authentically linking into it, including some of the biggest companies in the world, and why they care.
You know, I was walking out of the center yesterday and I heard laughter. Like, we're slowly coming back to letting people in the building. You know, a lot of companies focus on diversity and inclusion, but belonging is a huge construct that we don't really talk about. Angel Cabrera is a friend of mine, president of Georgia Tech. We were talking, and I was like, the most brilliant thing I've ever heard was the
And
dual.
for the record, you know, Jay is a UGA
Oh,
alum.
he knows that very well. Go
That says,
Dogs.
that
Honor
says
if you're watching.
something that he has this Georgia Tech
But that is
connection.
peaceful negotiations going on right now. But what I told him, one of the most brilliant things I ever heard was when I heard about the dual degree program between Morehouse Spelman and Georgia Tech. Angel, you'll never be able to give the experience to a black male that Morehouse can, and you should never try.
Right.
And they'll never be able to have the engineering school that you have, so why don't you collaborate and look at a dual degree program? When you start to talk about a safe space to fail and fly, and what Barry talked about, those founders that said, I didn't even know if I had a shot. Here's what happens in accelerators and incubators all over the country. If I'm a black founder, I go in and think I gotta be twice as sharp, twice as on point, all my numbers crossed. I can't be vulnerable. What that translates to, if I can't be vulnerable, I can't learn. Any incubator or accelerator, they'll say the most powerful thing about it was the relationships that you develop. But also the data suggests that 91% of our circle that we actually interact with looks like us. And if I don't look like you, then I don't get the benefit of the relationships. So here, I'm not vulnerable enough to learn. I don't feel like I belong. And I'm not building the relationships. So as you said, so many of our female founders, our black founders, go from incubator to accelerator to incubator to accelerator, just trying to gain some traction. Anyone with any stripes in this city has been through at least 4 to 6 programs. Creating this safe space to fail and fly. Creating a space that wasn't sent by a municipality or a corporation, but where it's of the community, by the community, for the community is a different model. And when I walk in, even though we're under construction still, and we've got a 54,000 square foot building that we're reimagining, before COVID, we were seeing anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 people per week walk through our doors, and we're not even fully open yet. That kind of belonging, that kind of attrition comes from a sense of, I believe that when I walk through these doors, I'm different, I'm seen. And I think for founders, as you both have brought up, there's a power in feeling seen. And I think that the Russell Center inherently has that built into its DNA because it was built brick by one of the most prolific entrepreneurs this city has ever produced. And in a time where black people weren't even people. Right. There's a special energy in that space, but there's also that very same special energy in our city.
So this element of belonging, and as we're getting close to time here, one thing I want to make sure, Barry, you speak to, you know, kind of the social impact aspect of what you're doing at Techstars, because as you and I have talked before, it's about creating space for someone doing that, which is unique, but this is not about not making money. So talk about that, you know, what's unique about that and really, you know, how you're helping those entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I know we're coming up on time. If you are making investments in the year of 2020 and you are not investing in companies that are looking to make some type of impact, you don't care about money. You're not paying attention to Gen Z. These next generations, they don't do things if they don't have impact behind them. Like, these next generations are going to change our world. And so as I'm looking at social impact companies, I'm looking at, like, I truly believe I'm going to have some of the greatest Techstars classes that have ever come through all of Techstars, right? Because these companies are doing things that matter, but they're doing it in a way, and that's where we come in, like, to help them find what is the perfect business model for this? How do you get your first couple of customers with this? You know, how can we be creative around that? And I think this is something, I know we keep pointing back to Atlanta doing it right. Not only will we get inclusivity right, but we will also get right building something that has morals behind it, that stands on something that is about impact. And if we invest in things that matter and we look 20 years from now, our city is not going to be the next Silicon Valley, it's going to be the first Atlanta, right? And it's going to be something different, it's going to be something special, and it's going to be built on all of these pillars of positivity.
And that's well said. And I think as we talk here, we're talking about building a powerful, unique innovation ecosystem and using Atlanta really as this kind of next-gen prototype. And there's elements of startups, capital, corporations or colleges, by the way, from Georgia Tech, HBCUs, Emory, and all that. And also, we didn't get a chance to really talk even about our creative influence that we had that we believe contribute to it. So just as we, yeah, exactly. This is where I'm going to go. As you are my inspiration for this next question, I'll ask you, I want each of you to answer this. But if you think about why Atlanta, as Jay has in his shirt there, why Atlanta influences everything. What's that unique thing? What's that X factor that really makes you believe we're that next-gen global innovation hub that's going to define itself for what it is and not try to copy anybody else. So, Bear, start with you, and we'll go
We
this
got
way.
like 20 seconds apiece, huh?
Yeah.
So Atlanta influences everything now and will continue to influence everything because we have everything in one location in a very dense place, right? And I think the last thing that we have to get together to figure out is how do we collaborate, which is why we named our fund Collab, because that's the last piece our city needs, is once we figure out how to collaborate, we are going to be an unstoppable and unmovable force.
Perfect. Doria.
Alex, I think the two things I would point to not be redundant with what these two I know are going to talk about. One, in the last 5 years, our pool of tech talent grew by 30%, right? And we know that funding has lagged. So when you think about a great place to build a business, we've consistently been in the top sort of 10 cities to build a great business. But for investors, this is a great place to invest in supporting and building a business for that reason. Number two, we have 30 Fortune 1000 companies headquartered in Atlanta. And that is, it represents in last year, in revenue terms, $500 billion.
Right.
If you're a company that, whether you're a B2B or a B2C company and are thinking about going to market, there's no better place to do it.
Perfect. And Jay, let you wrap.
Atlanta's still affordable enough to dream. And a group of dreamers 50 years ago, some 20 and 30-year-olds, literally changed the world without firing a single shot. Atlanta has it in its DNA. I see us doing it again.
Perfect. I love it. And I love that you use dreaming it because I think that's really about what building an innovation community anywhere, whether it's within your company, your organization, whether it's in a region, is about letting people be able to dream and make those dreams become a reality. So we thank all of you for joining us for this panel about building powerful and unique innovation ecosystems. Hopefully you enjoyed our case study about Atlanta. Enjoy the rest of Venture Atlanta, and I believe I'm going to turn it over to Brooke. Thank you.